In this video, I'm going to be looking at Next.js 15, and in particular, what we're going to be looking at is a crash course on Next.js 15, and we will be creating this travel app over here. So we are using Next.js 15 with TypeScript and also Tailwind for your styling. So on the homepage, we can click Let's Go. This will then fetch an API that we will create for all of our travel destinations. You can see here we have a list of all of the 10 locations that we have here, and we also have reviews. So if we click into reviews as well, we will be using Next.js server actions to be able to fill in this form and populate a review. We will also be looking at performance enhancements such as incremental static regeneration and so on. We will also, everything in this video, we will be creating as our own APIs within the project. So you can see here we've deployed this and we get a certain URL. So in Vercel, we will deploy everything and you get everything set up for you. So when we commit our changes, we can then automatically publish to Vercel. The topics covered in this video are here, which is we'll set up the Next.js project. We're going to use the app router in this project instead of the pages router. We will be creating dynamic APIs. So in this scenario here, we have destinations, which is our APIs that we create with route handlers. We will fetch data in server components as well, and we will show you how to use that. Along with that, the dynamic routing with ID. So in our app itself, if we go onto our destinations, let's say, for example, I wanted more information on New York, I can click into here to view more details, and then this will call the dynamic API, so the id.tsx API. And if you inspect in here, first of all, in our network tab, if I just quickly refresh the page, we will get an API to destinations over here. So that's what we'll be covering in this. And along with that, we'll build our own custom 404 page and implement not found invalid pages. So if we have any invalid pages, then we can use the not found function for that. The header component, which is just your client side component, your Tailwind styling over here. And then along with that, we'll be using environment variables so we can manage our API URLs securely. So this is all done with Vercel. We'll deploy with Vercel. We'll also add in middleware for any request processing. So we'll show you how to use the middleware.ts file in Next.js 15. And then finally, what we're going to be looking at is React server actions. In particular, to do with the reviews, we will be explaining what they are in the React server actions and how they improve performance. We will also use our server actions on our form that we have in our reviews page as well over here. So that is everything in this Next.js crash course. So let's get started with the build. Right, so the first thing we need to do is install Next.js. So what I'm going to do is just open my terminal up, and in here, let me just zoom in, and I want to go to my YouTube folder, so cd YouTube, and in here I want to create the Next.js 15 crash course. So let me just clear everything out, and then I'm going to install Next.js, the latest one. So it's npx create next app at latest, and then whatever your project is. In this case, it's going to be Next.js 15 cc, so crash course. Press enter, and then we'll go through our steps as we normally do with the installation. So we want to proceed, and actually what we want to do beforehand, we want to check the node version because certain node versions are not compatible. So we're on node version 14, so we need to change that to node 22. That's the latest one, and then we can install our Next.js 15 app, and we want to proceed with this. And then we will be using TypeScript. We don't want to use ESLint, and we do want to use Tailwind. We don't want to use the source directory, but you can do if you want, and we will use the app router, and we also want TurboPack enabled. So would you like to customize the import alias? It's app by default, so that's fine. We can keep it as that. So now everything will get installed. And then what we want to do is, if we look whilst that's getting installed, we have a header component, so we can create that one first, but we can look at the file directory itself when it installs everything that we need. So now that's installed, all we need to do is cd into the Next.js 15 crash course over here, and then we can do code space dot, and then that will open up our VS Code terminal. So now what we want to do is open up a terminal inside our VS Code, and in here what we want to do is we want to again check the NVM version, so we'll use node 22. Now let's go through the actual files itself. So we have a tsconfig, which is fine, it's all set up for us the way we need to. We have the post css_config.m, which is for our Tailwind styles, package.json, which has all the relevant things we need in there. So we're on React 19 now because we can use the server components and also the latest version of Next. So in our Next config, we just have our normal Next config in here, but we will be looking at expanding this further. And then we have a public folder with all our files. But the main thing we need to look at is the app router. So in the app router, we have three main files. So we have global CSS, which handles all our CSS. So in our case, we're importing Tailwind in, which is done for us when we install Next.js. We have our layout, which is the overall layout of the app. So let's just go into this. We have declared some fonts in here. We also have metadata. So what we want to do is, instead of create next app, we want to change this to travel or Next.js 15 travel app or something like that, whatever you want to call it. And then in description, we can put in a description, a travel app built with Next.js 15. That's fine. Then we have our higher order. This is basically our higher order component that wraps the HTML and body tags around our app. So everything inside here is in the page. So in page.tsx, we have our boilerplate in here. But what I'm going to do is just delete this and just put in a div saying travel app. So now what I want to do is just save this. And then what we can do now is just run this locally. So npm run dev, and this will basically run everything for us, get our local host started. So we're working on 3001. In here, we have our travel app rendering. So eventually we want to get to this stage where we've built our travel explorer over here. So what we're going to be doing now is doing the first page, which is the home page, and adding in the header component to all of the pages that we create, and we will do that one next. Right, so let's go ahead and create this header component. In this crash course, we're going to also have the home page, the destinations page, the reviews page, and the individual destinations page as well. So when we click through to here, we have the information for the individual destinations. Along with that, we will also have the APIs. So it will be /API/destinations in this scenario over here. We can get all of the APIs in here. If we add in the ID as well, so let's say, for example, we got New York in here, we can basically add in the number 3, so the ID, and press enter, and we will just get the New York data in here. So that's essentially what we want to get to. So in our travel app over here, let's go ahead and create the header component. So in my app folder, what I'm going to do is create a file or a folder, first of all, in my app folder. This is going to be in the components, and then /header.tsx. So now what I'm actually going to do, I've got all the code complete, but let's just bring everything in. So this is just a normal React component. So essentially export default function of header. This is just a static component that essentially links to the relevant path that we need. So in here, we have the logo in here, and then we also have the navigation link. So the home one will go to the /route, the destination will go to /destinations, and then the link will go to /reviews. The way you create pages in Next.js is quite simple. In here now, the app route over here, what happens is the layout kind of controls everything across the application, but you can add sub layouts as well within the relevant folders. So the way you would create this destinations page over here is simply you just add in a new folder in here, or a new file within the app layout, and this is called destinations. So now what will happen is this will be the path for /destinations, and then it's /, and then we have the reserved keyword, which is page.tsx. So page.tsx, like so. And then in here, you would have your general page. So we can actually just copy this one and then paste that in here. And this will be named destinations, like so. And then we can say destinations page in here. So now what we've essentially done is create a page in here for our destinations. And also we have the header, which we've created. So we need to initialize this header across the application. So what you can do is add it in here. So that will cover the header for the home page, but then you will need to repeat this process again and again for each page that you create. So that's why we have the layout in here. So in the body here, all we can do now is just type in header, and this will basically import the header for us on every single page. And then the children is essentially every single page after that. So let me just save this. And now what we can see is we should have a header up here, which is fine. That's working. Now, if we click reviews, we should get a 404 page, which we do over here. So that's working as expected because we have not created the /reviews page. And now what we should do is when we click destinations, we should have the destinations page. So let's click that. And you can see here, destinations page is rendering because we've created the folder here in our app router. So in here, anything that we create, so for example, is /destinations will be obviously the destinations page, but it will only render /destinations if page.tsx is in there, and this is a valid function that we've created in here. So that's essentially how you would do the pages. So now that is the header component complete. What we want to do next is handle this 404 page in here, and we can create a custom 404 page ourselves. So what we'll do is do that one next. Right, so to create this custom 404 page in Next.js, what we want to do is there's a special special reserved keyword. So in our app router in here, all you need to do is create a new file, and this file is just essentially notfound.tsx like that, and you basically just style what you want in the not found. So let me just bring in the code that I have. Essentially, it's just a function that we have in here. I'm just going to render, oops, the destination you're looking for does not exist, and then you can go back home to with a link. So now let's just save that, and then all you need to do now, it says React component not found, so the default export is not found, but we just need to refresh. So now you can see here we have our custom 404 page in here. So that's as simple as it is. We go into reviews, we haven't created the reviews page, but what happens as a fallback is our custom 404 page gets rendered instead. So now what we want to do is we want to fix that reviews page in general. So let's just create the page. So all we need to do here is just copy it in here, create a new file, and this is going to be /reviews. So that's what I'll call the folder. And then it's going to be page.tsx like so. And then you just paste in what we have, change this to reviews like that. And then all you need to do now is save. And now you can see it says get 500 for /reviews. But now what will happen is it'll be a 200 because we've created the page. So let me just refresh this now, and you can see now we're on the reviews page in here. So we have the home page, the destinations page, and the reviews page. So that's how you create the custom 404 page with Next.js 15. What to do is on our home page. So if we go back to the home page in our app, you can see here it says welcome to Next Travel, and then we want to navigate to the destinations page. So let's go ahead and do that first of all. This one's quite simple to do. So if we go into our home page over here, let me just quickly bring in the code for the home page, which is essentially static content that we have. So in page.tsx, we have Tailwind styling as well. If you're unfamiliar with the Tailwind styling, I've got a crash course on my channel as well for the Tailwind CSS styling. If you go through that, you'll understand all of this in detail, and we go through many different types of designs. So please have a look at that. So now all we have is a link to /destinations in here. That's fine. So let me just quickly save this, and we've got the homepage complete. So now in my travel app, we have obviously the homepage complete. What we want to do next is go into the destinations page, and in particular in our destinations, we need to create the API for all of these destinations that we have over here. So let's go ahead and create that. So if we go into /API/destinations, this is the API that we are using across our application on our travel destinations. Now let's go ahead and in our code, and to create an API in Next.js 15 is quite simple. All we do in app, we create a new folder which is /API, and in this folder all we do is create route.ts files. So in this scenario, we'll create a new file which is /destinations. So if you think about the navigation, what happens is that it's going to be /API/destinations/route.ts in here, and that is the same as what we have over here. So it's /API/destinations, and then it's /route. So that's as simple as it is. What we now need to do is create this array of destinations in our Next.js app. But what you would normally do in a normal scenario is all your data is in some sort of database that your app communicates with, and that's how everything is secure and separate from our code base itself. But because this is a crash course, we'll just do it in here. So what I want to do now is I want to create a lib folder. So let me just create the lib folder outside of at the top level here. So this folder will be lib, and in the lib folder, what I'm going to do is create my destinations array. So in here now, let me just bring in my destinations array, which is essentially export const of all our destinations like so, and then we can create a type for this. So let's actually do that as well. So in our types, let's create a folder again for types in here. So let's do a file for now, because we won't have that many types. But again, in your code base, if it is a large code base, then you should have separate types. But we'll keep everything in here for now. So in here now, what I want to do is create my destination type. So let me just paste this in, which is all of the values that we have in here, which is coming from the lib folder. So let's just add in the type in here like so. So now it's saying there's an error because this should be an array. So now let me just save this. So now we have our destinations. We need to tie these destinations in here to the API. So all we need to do is in app /API/destinations in here, route.ts. What we want to do in here is quite simple for this one, which is essentially we just get an async function. So it's essentially export async function and we have the keyword of get because we want to get the response of obviously what we have, and we can return this, which is fine. But what we want to do is we want to return. So let me just do return response dot JSON. And this is what you would do in your Node.js application as well. But in our scenario now, you could basically copy what Copilot suggests, which is the destinations array and so on. But what I want to do is we've already defined the destinations object. So all we need to do now is import that in. So it's destinations from lib destinations like that. And now we should have created our API. So what we just need to do is test this in our browser. So we've got the path here in our deployed application. So let's just copy this. And instead of slash destinations, it will be slash API slash destinations. And now enter. And now you can see all of our destinations are in here. So that's our first API created. What we now want to do is essentially create this page over here where we create a grid, we map all of the destinations across. We will use some client-side rendering for this one, just to show you how we would do client-side rendering with a use effect and use state and so on. And we will do all of this next. Right, so what I want to do now is create this destinations page over here. So let's go ahead, essentially render all of this out. So we've created our API over here. So we just need to map all of the data and then render it out onto our Next.js page. Let's go ahead and do that. So if we go into our page over here, this is our home page. So we've done that one. We'll close down the API for now. And in our destinations folder, we have page.tsx in here. All I want to do is bring in our completed destinations page. Now, what we want to do is we have a destination card, which essentially renders all of the destinations out for us. And this is where we will be doing our fetch for our data from the API. So the way Next.js 15 works is everything is server side first. Then if you want to explicitly use client side, there's something you need to mention, which we will look at now. So let's go ahead and in our components folder, let's just do a new file called destination card.tsx. And in here, we can do refce and we can just basically render the destination card for now in here. So now we can just import this in like so. And all we need to do now is save everything. So it's destination card.tsx in here. Now we are rendering out the destination card itself. So now let's go in over here. You can see the destination card is being rendered. So that's fine. What we now want to do is use React itself, and we have our use effects, and this is how we would basically fetch our data. So what we can do is, so essentially what we want to do is our use effect fetches the data from our API and then renders it out in this grid-like format, and this is responsive as well. So let me just bring in what we have. So in our destination card, I'm just going to paste in what I have. So in here now, we have a reserved keyword for use client, which basically means that when we want to use use effect and use state or any of the React hooks, we need to have that done on the client side. So with Next.js 15, everything is server side generated first and then rendered out onto the client. So it passes down static content to the browser. So that is good again for SEO, any sort of metadata you want to pass across as well. So any web crawlers can look at that, and it's better for performance as well because everything is already generated before it hits the browser. So that's the first thing you need to think about when it comes to creating these pages over here. Everything is server side rendered. Then because we want to put it in a destination card, the use effect and the use state is client side rendered. So what happens is we now need to use the special keyword which we have of use client in here. So just bear that in mind because that is important when we're using React hooks in general. Again, we can separate our concerns by creating components folder and creating a types.ts file and so on. We're just going to keep it simple for this crash course over here. Then we have our default component or function in here, which essentially has our destinations. Is set as obviously the destination type that we want. For now, it's essentially this type in here, which is local, and the actual complete destination type, which is in our type folder or our type file at the bottom here, is for our individual destination. So let me just essentially rename this. So our type will now be, instead of destination, it's going to be an array of a short destination for now, but you can think about a better name than this and add it in, but it's just a snapshot of our destination that we are using. Then we have our use effect, which is essentially an async function with a try catch block. We have our response in here, which is /API/destinations. We fetch our destinations, and then if there's not a response, then we obviously throw a new error, which goes to the catch block, and then it logs out the error. Eventually, we get our destination set in our use state over here. Then we can map this out. So destinations.map, for each destination, we are essentially mapping an image, a H2, and a link, which we have in our final build over here, like so, along with the relevant styling that we need. So let me just save this. And now in our destinations page, you can see something gone wrong in here. And now this is where we need to update our next.config.js in here, because we're using images from external websites. We now need to specify them in next config. So what we will do is we will fix this error next. Right, so now that we're getting this error over here, what Next.js tends to do is it doesn't allow any images from external sites. So what we need to do is we need to essentially configure the images section of external URLs that we use. So that is done in the next config.js file. So all we need to do is essentially whitelist this URL in our next config file. So let's go ahead and do that. And that's quite simple. If we go down to next config over here, and in here we just basically do images like so, and then you pass in the domains like that. So essentially images, domains, and all the domains that we want to whitelist. I believe we have a couple images that we whitelist, so let me just add in the second one, which is this one over here. So now let me just save this, and we need to restart the server. So with TurboPack, it basically restarts the server. It says here, found a change in next config TS, restarting the server to apply the changes. So let's go back in the browser and just refresh the page. And now you can see the images are going to be loaded. For the first go, they won't load correctly because they were fetching the images, and now they are loaded. So when we refresh the page now, the images load instantly because they are now cached. So that is essentially how it works. What we want to do now is we are fetching all of our APIs client side, but what we now want to do is first of all we have the array of our data, but when we click to view details, we essentially want to go to destination / number 3 or whatever the number is. So first of all, we need to create that page. And then second of all, we need to create the API for that. And we will do that next. Right, so now what we want to do is create this individual destinations page. So what we essentially want to do here is create that, but it needs to be dynamic. So these values over here are going to be the params ID that we need to get, and then use that ID to be able to fetch the relevant information from the relevant API as we displayed earlier over here. So if we go to /1, for example, and /API, this will basically set the API as the first API that we want. So the first part is let's create the page, and then the second part is we need to create the API as well. So let's do that. And then finally, what we want to do is we want to be able to fetch all of this data instead of client side on the server. So we'll show you how that works. So let me just go into my code where we have the app router over here. We have our components. Let's close them down. We have our destinations, which is where we want the ID to appear. So all you do now is we create another route after destination. So within the destinations folder, so in here now, create a new file. Within the folder, we need to do ID, or this can be slug or whatever you want to do, / and then page.tsx in here again. So now all you want to do now is simulate what we have here. So let me just copy this and paste this in, and what you can call this whatever you want, but in this scenario here, I'm just going to call this individual destination or destination information page, or whatever you want to call it. Let's just call it individual destination, like so, because this is a single destination that we have. And let me just render out the ID, so individual destination, like so. And let's do a p tag for the ID is, and then we need to get the ID from somewhere, and we generally get that from the params object. So let me just save this for now, and I want to first of all check that this page is working correctly, and it should do. So let me just refresh. So now you can see it's working correctly. So let me just go in a destination, New York, for example. You can see all the information is working. But if I did /200, you can see it's still working. So what we want to do is we want to stop the number of the slash based on the ID if it is valid. So let's do that via the params. Again, we need to access the params. So what you would do normally in this scenario here, again, if you remember, this page is server side, so we can get access to the params. What we want to do now is destructure the params in here, and let's just actually console log the params object like that. And then I also want to go into page over here, or the relevant component where I logged out the all the destinations. So simply just do console.log, and I want to delete this one in the use effect. So now let me save this, and now what will happen is we will get an error. So let me just refresh, and now you can see here, let me just zoom in and expand this. You can see here it says server promise and then it's pending params. So essentially, the params are now pending because this is a promise, and now we need to resolve or reject it. But again, when something is pending, we need to know that this is async, so therefore we need to await it. So let's go ahead and await the params itself. So in this page, this is the destinations page, and we need to find the relevant page, which is in here. And I'm just going to close all the other tabs. So we've got params in here. If we hover over it, it's saying params is of any type, so we need to specify the type as well. Let's go ahead and do that. So let's just create an interface in here of individual destination props, like so. And then params is generally ID of string like that. But because params is an object, what we want to do is destructure it, and it's also a promise, so we want to await it. So let's do const ID of params like so. Again, we need to add in the type in here of individual destination props, and let's actually console log the ID as well. And ID is of curly brace ID like that. So now let's save this. And again, we remember that this was a promise, and you can see in here what it's saying is basically saying it's saying an error in here. So it says route slash destination slash ID use params.id. Params should be awaited before using its properties. Learn more about it in here, this URL in here. We can kind of fix this already. So the way it works is we just need to add await in here. But again, if you hover over await, it says await expressions are only allowed with async functions and at the end of top levels and at the top levels of modules. So now you can see, let me just delete this, and you can see this error has happened in here. So what we would do is the block that the ID is in is obviously in the page function over here. Now, because everything is server side, we can essentially do something quite simple, which is we can just add async in here like that. So now we've turned this individual destination page component into an async function now. So all we can do now is console log the ID like so. Let me just delete this because we're logging it out in the browser itself. So now let me save, and actually let's check the terminal in here. You can see there's no errors now. So let's go ahead in the browser, and now you can see it says ID is 200. Let me just actually, we don't need the $sign, and save that. And now if we change this to, for example, go into destinations, and we can go and type in view details 1, for example. Let's go into here, ID is 2, destinations, and go to Dubai. And again, click through to here, ID is 9. So that's all working correctly, but we're getting a 500 error. What's the error in here? Timeout error. So let me just close this, clear everything out, and do npm run dev once more. So now that is how you would get access to the params of obviously what we have. What we want to do next is create the page, and the params are working fine. Now what we want to do next is create the API for this ID. So what we will do is we will do that part next. Right, so now what we want to do is create the relevant API based on the params in here, but also the API should match the data we have in our destinations file. So in here, we only have 10 objects or 10 destinations that we want to cover. So therefore, if you do /11, for example, the API will fail because we don't have anything for 11 in here. So let's go ahead and do that. So all we need to do is go into follow the same pattern here, which is ID and then whatever the route is. So in API destinations, we just create a new file in here within the folder of id /route.ts, like that. And essentially we can just copy this, paste that in, because it is a get request that we need, but there's a bit more to it. So in here now, and actually what I will do is, we do need this, but we'll delete that for now. In here we get access to the request object. So what we can do is destructure the params like so, and let's get access to the request object if we need it, which we probably won't, but let's just add it in anyway. And this request object is of type request from, see if we can import that in, or actually it just covers it itself, so that's fine. And then again, the params type is of promise, so let's just paste in what we have and save. So we have the params that we're getting, and then the ID, the promise ID of string in here, which is essentially the same on the page. So if we go in here, we need to actually update this. So let's just update that as well. So in here now, we basically wrap this object in a promise, like so. Now we save that because we're async awaiting it in here. And then in here now, what we want to do is we want to get access to the ID. So export async function, get access to the ID. So we need to await in here. Then we want to return, but we need to do some filtering or finding first of all. So you can do either, but I'm going to do a variable, so const, or you can call it single destination, whatever it may be. And essentially it's destination.find. For each destination that we have, we want to return destination.id of string equal to the ID here of the string. So this ID is a string, but this one is a number, I believe. So all we need to do is do .toString on here, like so. So now we have access to the destination, which essentially is what we have, which is the relevant one. So the params will say the ID is 4, for example. So then all we need to do is find the relevant one in this destinations object in here. So if it is 4, then it will return this object of Barcelona in the API. So that's how simple it is. If there's no destination in here, what we want to do is do response.json, and this JSON response will be destination not found of the status of 404, like that. Otherwise, we just need to do response.json. And again, you could have done it in here, but all we need to do now is pass in this destination like so. Save that. And that's how simple it is to create the API. And we want to test this out now. So let's go in here and type in /API/destinations. And the first one we want is 4, which was Barcelona. So we should get Barcelona back. And you can see why it's not happened, because I didn't type in API properly. So let's try that again. And now you can see here that it's saying Barcelona is back as a return. So let me just do 400, for example. And you can see now it says destination not found. So if destination not found, then it means that obviously it's out of the 10 that we have. So if we do 10, you can see it returns Bali in here. So that is how simple it is to create the API in Next.js. But what we want to do is essentially, the tricky part is this API is localhost 3000, but the main base path gets generated when we deploy onto Vercel. So you can see these bits here are what get deployed onto Vercel. So you need to bear that in mind as well. We will cover that. So that's when we use the environment variables to determine the base path. So going back in our API now, we've got the API set up. So now we can kind of fetch using this method over here. So let me just close this one down. We can close the destinations down. So now we have access to, again, the ID in the params. We can then pass this on to a function that we need to declare. So let's go ahead and create that function. So in my destination page, I want to create a function called fetch destinations, or whatever it may be. So again, we need to create this function. And what I'm going to do now is, this is where we have server actions. So in server actions, we can do all of this stuff on the server. So again, because this is an async function, we can do this on the server. So let me just create a new folder in our app folder in here. So this is going to be a new folder called actions. This is what I'm going to call it. And in here, I'm just going to create a file called fetch.ts. So this is where all of my fetch commands will live. And essentially what I want to do is create this function, which is fetch destination, which takes in an ID. So let's go ahead and do that, which is quite simple. It's export const fetch destination is an async function. Again, that's fine. And I'm actually just going to bring in what I have, paste that in, and we'll go through it. So the base path, which is what I was talking about, which is process.env.next public URL. So we need to define that next public URL. So in here, we need to create public URL. So let's go ahead at the types level or the tsconfig level. Let's do .env.local like that. And we have two variables in here. First variable is the next public API URL, which is again our local host. And then we have our Vercel URL, which when we deploy is going to be the URL that we get from Vercel, but that's any of these basically that you can whitelist. So that's how it would work. Because we obviously local host, we want 3001 because that's what we're using. And now let me save this. If we go back in here, again, I'll put in the O in here. This will be whatever we deploy it as. But in our scenario now, it's basically public API URL, which we can verify as command FV, which is localhost 3001. So that's fine. We can add this one in after, or just delete this for now. We then are doing a await fetch with the base path slash API slash destinations and then slash the ID that we pass in, which we get from the page. So that is how it would work. If response is not okay, then obviously we handle that. We can just return null or you can throw an error, whatever you want to do. You can put this in a try catch block. But I just wanted to keep it as simple as possible. Then we just return response.json. So that is essentially what happens. And then all we need to do is console log the destination that we have in here. So the destination is going to be the single one. So let me just save that. And let me just actually do individual so we can differentiate. And the response will be, if you hover over this, is an object of destination or it will return null. So again, if you want to find the type, you can just hover over it and then you can just put that in here as well like that. Import in the type like so, save that. And then it says reload env.local in here. So now all I want to do is see in the console that everything is working. So let me just delete the API part in the URL, and essentially we should get Barley back, this object here. So let me just press enter, go in the console. You can see the ID is correct. So in console, you can see an object is returned from the server. If you look here, what has essentially happened is if you look in the fetch file, this is coming from the server like so. What we want to do is we want to log out individual destination. This one in here is Barley in here. So you can see that everything is working correctly. Now all we need to do is render out the information, which is if we press back and let's go into Barley, and we just need to render out the UI, which will be static content because this is all happening on the server. So therefore we have the information on the server. So therefore we can pass this down as static content to the browser itself. So that's the beauty of Next.js is we can think about, for example, this page can be static content, whereas the destinations page, for example, is going to be client side. So this will always be client side because we're using the use effect and so on with the use client keyword at the top of the component. So now if we go into New York, for example, this is server rendered. So when we run the build, it generates all the static pages for us already. And in this scenario, the static pages will already be generated. So all we need to do now is we have the information in here, so we just need to render it out. So let me just essentially go back in our code in destination slash ID in the page in here. We're rendering out the individual destination like so. So all we need to do now is if we go into destinations, I believe we need to create a component. So let me just check, which we will do. So let me just paste everything in here. And what we now need to do is we're importing in the fetch destination at the top. If there's not a destination, we have the fallback in here of destination not found. Or what you can actually do is do the not found keyword, like so, from Next.js, which basically navigates you to obviously the custom 404 page that we have, but I'm just going to keep it as the text for now because we want to stay on the same page. Then we have this destination info component. We don't need React fragments around it, so let me just save that. And now what we need to do is create this component for destination info. So let me just essentially copy and bring that in. So I can just paste that into my components folder like so. And you can see we have a destination info type, so which we need to create. So let me go ahead and create that, which is quite simple. I'll just copy it across, which is of type destination or null. So we have the types file in here. Let me just paste that in, is of type destination or null. All we need to do now is import this in. This again will all be static content. We're not using use client in here, so just keep that in mind. This will be server side. We're just essentially rendering everything out. So now what we need to do is, again, optional chain everything because we want to make sure nothing fails and we don't get a white screen. So now you can see we've rendered our individual destinations page, and we have also created the API as well. So finally, what we want to do is look at the reviews page, and this is where we will be going further into the crash course itself. We've covered most of the stuff, so we've covered all of this stuff here. We've implemented the not found page, we built the custom 404 page, we've created the reusable header component and Tailwind styling. We've also worked on environment variables. We haven't deployed yet. What we want to do next is look at how we would add middleware in, and it's as simple as you think. And then finally, we just need to cover the React Server Actions, which will be a whole section in itself. So we will do the middleware next. Right, so what we want to do next is look at middleware. So essentially what I want to do is copy this middleware here. It's quite simple what we need to do in this section for middleware. So middleware is something we have in Node.js on our server side, where it kind of does any actions for us that we, for example, want to repeat multiple times, for example, parsing JSON from a response. So essentially middleware is something that is like a bridge, for example, or a function that happens before anything is rendered on the client side. So if you have any repeated tasks, then again, you can update the headers or update the response.json or whatever it is. You have certain types of middleware that you can use in Node.js. But in Next.js, what we can do is, instead of adding that in our obviously Express server, we can just create a new file in here called middleware.ts. And you can essentially paste in or add in as many middlewares as you want. In this scenario here, what I'm doing is I've got a middleware that I've defined, which is essentially specifying the country that we're in. So middleware executed of the country, and you can get it from the request object, or as a fallback, I'm just going to put in UK. So the response headers that we have are going to update X user country with the country. So in this scenario here, I would expect to see that the UK is being initialized in the response headers of any call that we have. So let's go ahead and check that out. So in here, let me just expand this. I want to go into the tab for the network like that. And what I want to do is go into destination. So let me just clear this and type destinations in here. We can see this one is fine. It's all worked correctly. But if you scroll down, you can see X user country is the UK, and that is where the middleware kicked in. So in this scenario here, the middleware was executed before anything else happened. So you can see the logs at the top, middleware executed country UK, which is this console log over here as well. And because it's on the server side, everything is logged in the terminal. When it's on the browser side, then everything is logged in the browser. So in this section over here. So that is middleware. It's basically a bridge between the application from the server side doing some sort of function that we want. In this scenario, is essentially updating the response headers of the X user country. It's essentially executing that middleware here, and then it happens before obviously it renders the page. So that is what middlewares are. And if you have any in your applications that you want to use with Next.js, it's as simple as that. So all you do is export function middleware, the request or what response, whatever you want. You could do request, response, next. So res, rec, res, and next like that. which is basically what you would do in Express anyway. Do what you need to do, and then this will execute on the server side. So that's the introduction with middleware. If you want to read up more on what middleware is, then you can look at the exact definition of what it is, but it's something that happens in the middle of obviously your application. That is the middleware. What we want to do next is look at the review page in here, which is another separate API, which we will kind of submit everything on. We create this form. This is a server action that we haven't touched just yet, and we will do that next. Right, so now what we want to do is create the reviews page. So let's go ahead and do that. So in here, we can close down the destinations folder in here. We also need to create an API for the reviews itself. Now let's open up the reviews page. In here, let's just delete this image because we're not rendering an image, but we will have two components. The first component is going to be a review form, and then the second one is going to be the reviews themselves, so all the reviews that we have. So let me just delete this and paste in what we have. So that's what we have. We need to fetch all the destinations on the server side this time, because in our form we want to access all the destinations that we have, so it makes the user choose one of them and then give a review on it. So that's what we have. And if you scroll down here, you can see Paris is the name of the place, and then the review is a great place to visit, and so on. Again, this information should be kept in a database of some sort, and then you can connect your server to, or your API to the database, and then that way we can do your CRUD methods. But for this scenario, we're going to just have it in the lib folder. So first thing we need to do actually is create a file for our review. So let's just bring that in. So in our lib folder, let me just paste in our reviews. So we need to create a review type, which essentially we don't have. So let me just bring that into our types as well. So in types.ts at the end, in here we have a review type, which is a review ID, the destination, the name, the review, and the rating. So all we need to do now is import this in like so. And then we have two reviews in here. So that's fine. And the structure is all okay. Let me save that. And for reviews, what we want to do is in here, this is the get request, which gets the reviews. And then this one is a post request, which creates the new reviews for us. And then again, we need to basically have two methods in our API this time. So in lib, we can close that down because we don't need that anymore. We have the reviews in here. We need to create the two components, so we can do that later. But in our API, we need to create a new folder. This one is called reviews, like so. And then simply we just do route.ts in here. First one is quite simple. We can just basically copy this for our get request, which is, instead of destinations, it's going to be reviews, like so. So that's the get done. So we can actually do the review component, which is quite simple. And let's just do this one on the client side. So let me copy the review component. In my components folder, I'm just going to paste this in. We can look at this one quite quickly. It's a client component, so therefore we're using use client. We have array of reviews. Again, you can create the review type for this. So this will be review type like that. Reviews, and then set reviews. Actually, we just need to do an or as well. It can be an empty array as well, can't it? So that's fine. We have the reviews. We are using a use effect to fetch the reviews, like so, which is basically this function here. We have obviously our URL. This is the wrong URL, but yeah, our app URL is going to be localhost 3001 /API /reviews. That is essentially the reviews over here that we've created for the get request. Then we set the reviews, then we just map it out and render out all the reviews in here. So let's just save that. And then in page, we want to comment out the form in here and save. So now let's go ahead in the reviews page on our local app, click reviews. Now I'm getting this error. So it's saying call stack exceeded. So I'm guessing it's because I've not imported it. The names are the same. So let's just change this name actually to the customer reviews component like that. And let's import this in. And then let me just change this name as well, rename. And then obviously inside the file as well, you would change it. So customer reviews, update the imports. And now this should work. So let me just save all of this. And now you can see we're fetching all of the reviews. So we have 2 reviews at the minute and they are now working correctly. So what we want to do next is we want to create this component here, which is the form. And then we will look at server actions and we will do that next. Right, so now we've done the fetch request or the get request for our reviews. We now want to do the post request. So first of all, what we need to do is we can create the form that is used on the reviews page. So this is the destination review form. So this form basically takes in all the destinations because we need to list out all of our destinations. So again, what we want to do is we want to fetch all the destinations server side. So that's as simple as just copying it across from another file. So in here in destinations, in page.tsx, this one is the use effect, which is all client side, but let's do this one server side. So let me just simply do const all destinations like so is equal to await, and then this will be an async function like that. And we want to just basically create a fetch all destinations function like so. And basically this will be done on the actions folder in here in fetch. So what I'm going to do is fetch all the destinations. So let me just go into here and bring in the function that we need, which is export async function, fetch all destinations, which returns a promise of destination. We have our base path in here. Again, let me just delete that. Then what we want to do is we want to await fetch the base path slash API destinations like so. Then all we need to do in reviews is essentially just paste this in. Let me just comment this out for now. And then I want to just log out the all destinations. So that's console log all destinations like so. And then let me save that and delete any other console logs that we do have in the app. So we've got the middleware one, we can get rid of that or comment it out for now. Let me save this now, and then we have our function declared and we just need to go on the reviews page. So let me just close all the other tabs. So now you can see on the server side, it actually has logged all the destinations. Because we're fetching everything on the server side, it's logging it in here. Now that's handy. So again, if you remember, server side code or any logs on the server side happen in our terminal. They won't get shown in the obviously the browser itself unless you create a component that uses use client, then they will get logged. So that's the first thing. Now what we want to do is create the form. So let's go ahead and uncomment this out. We need to create this form. So let's go ahead and create the file, which is destination review form .tsx like that. Press enter, REFCE. This is the review form, and all I'm going to do is just bring in the information for the form. So now that I've created the form, I want this form to be client side, and then the action for the submit will be on the server side, which will be a server action. So let me just quickly paste in the code that we have. Let me just delete this. So we have use client in here. When we handle submit, essentially we want to handle submit and then pass it in submit review. We have the actions folder in here, so we will create that next. Let me just comment this out actually and console log something like submitted or form submitted like that. Then we have our form which runs handle submit in here, so all the logic happens in here. Let me just import in my types. Scroll down, we have all destinations which is coming from the page itself, so we just need to import this in. So that's all the logic there. Let me just delete the console log on the server side. Then we map everything. We have the options for each import itself, and then we show the message in like so. So let me just save this. So there's 2 things we need to do. First one, we need to create the server action. Let's do that next. But first, before we do that, let's check this is all working. So let me just inspect in the console. When we submit, it should just basically say form submitted. So let's just select Paris console. Let me expand this a little bit more. Name is going to be Imran, and then review is going to be amazing, like so. And then this is going to be a 4-star review. Do we have that already? No, we don't. So we just keep it as 5 and submit. And now it's saying failed to submit review. So what's actually gone wrong in this one? Let me just go and check in the UI. So command F failed. And actually, let's go back because I believe we're on the wrong page. which is this one. So this is the one we need to inspect. So let me just go into here in the console, clear everything out and try again. So we'll say this is amazing, and then this has a five-star rating like that. Let me click submit review, and you can see here it says form submitted. So now that's all fine. This is a client-side component, but the action needs to be on the server. So let's go ahead and look at server actions itself. Now that the form is submitted, the benefits of using server actions is that you don't need to use useState, so therefore that's handy because you don't need to do all of the work that comes along with using useState for the form data, handling all of that and resetting everything for us. The data that we send across is then directly sent to the server action. So we need to receive that in our server action and do something with it. In our case, it's going to be to update our reviews API in here. But again, this should be connected to a database. So again, this isn't a best practice, but we're just doing it for this crash course in general. So that is the other thing. And also what we want to do is we want to add in some sort of UI revalidation, and we will look at how to do that with something called revalidate path. So that's what we're going to be doing. So let's go ahead and go in our code. In actions over here, we need to first of all create this function called submit review. So let's just uncomment this out, and in actions, let's create the new file, and this is going to be called review.ts like so. And then my server action, what I'm going to do, I'll just copy this and bring in the server action itself. So in here, we explicitly are saying that this is going to be using the server. So you need to make sure that this is in. Then we have our function in here, which is an async function. It takes in our form data as we have here. Again, we're specifying the review data, then review data gets updated, and then that review data gets pushed. So if you scroll down further, we get a try catch block. In the try block, we have a response, await fetch, obviously the next public API URL or whatever the base path is, /API/reviews. Then we do the method of post with the content type of application.json. Then we stringify everything in the body. If the response is not okay, then we throw the error, which goes to the catch block. Then we revalidate the path to /, which means that revalidate the page to update the UI. So in this scenario here, let's just click into here for now. It says here the original path. So this takes in a string. So this function allows you to purge cache data on demand for a specific path. So that's what we need to do basically, is pass in the original path. So in our case, it's going to be /reviews. If we go in our code, back in our review here, it's going to be /reviews here like that. So this updates the UI, and then it basically returns this object of success true, message review submitted successfully. So now let me save this. And what I want to do is log out the reviews. So if I go into the review page, which is in reviews page.tsx, in the customers reviews in here, again, we're fetching the reviews, and this is based on when the page reloads. So now what we want to do is just test this out. So let's just fill in a form, and then we'll just say Imran, and then the review is amazing, like so. And then the rating is going to be 5. Let me just press submit review. And if you remember, this should send a post request to our API, but we haven't created that. So this should fail. So let me just quickly submit the review. And it says fail to submit review. It says post 200, but again, we haven't configured that. So it shouldn't really work. It should be an error. So again, you could handle that with error handling and return the right response. So let me go into the API in route. We've only got this one, which is the get in here. What we now need to do is do the same for the post. So let me just bring that in. But it's a bit different this time. So all it is post. We get the review data, await request.json in here. If there's no name or no review or no destination, then we can throw an error saying invalid input. Otherwise, reviews.push into review data. Then we return the response that review submitted successfully. So that is everything complete now. We've got our server action set up, and we've created the post route as well, and we also have the form created in here. So what we want to do now is test all of this out and make sure that everything works correctly. So now we're fetching our 2 reviews in our array in here, and then we want to add Marrakesh, and then this says this was amazing, and the rating is going to be 5, and let's just submit the review, and it says review submitted successfully. So now let's just check in here the post. and you can see all the information was sent correctly with the server action. First of all, what we need to do now is refresh the page, and you can see here it's saying that there's one issue. Let me just see. Each child should have a key prop. That's fine. We'll fix that. And now you can see my review has been added in. So when we kind of submit the review, what we can do is essentially reload the page or navigate back to the home page or do something, but we essentially need to re-render this page because this page is static. So therefore we could add some sort of revalidate on here or something when we deploy the app, and ensure that every so often after 60 seconds or so we ensure that we have incremental static regeneration on there, so that when the user goes back to the home page after a certain amount of time, the review will get populated. So that's what you can implement to improve the performance of the app. So to solve the issue of having to reload yourself, all you can do is in the destination component, in the handle submit over here, after form submitted, you can just do window location.reload like that, and then that will pull in obviously the updated version in here. So that's as simple as it is. Let me just quickly show you how that works. So let me just add in a new one. So this time we'll do New York. I've been to New York, and again, the skyscrapers were amazing, and the rating this time is going to be 4. So now I don't want to reload, I just want to submit, and then review submitted, and it reloads and it says skyscrapers were amazing. So again, the server action is doing its work, and then once it's done its work, we can just reload the page. So that is basically how you would use server actions. And then we've got the one issue, so let me just fix that, which is in review. Check the render method. We need a unique key prop. So let me just copy this, and this is in our form. Command FV in here. It's not in here, so it'll be in the reviews itself. So let me find the customer reviews. In here we have that, and what we want to do is we can just do the index instead for now, and this will fix that issue as well. So now we have done the crash course. What I want to do next is show you how to deploy everything onto Vercel. Right, so what we want to do now is make sure that everything works when we deploy. So the good thing about Vercel is when we actually deploy after the first time, any commits we make on our repository to a certain branch, for example, the main branch in this case, it will then deploy the latest code that we have committed basically. So what we need to do is, let me just close everything down. First thing we should do before we do anything is run a build. So npm run build, just to see if everything works and all of our static pages are being created as well. So this is where, again, Next.js compiles everything, connects our static pages, and you can see now we've got an error in here. So it says error occurred pre-rendering page /reviews, and let's see why that's failed. So let's actually check this error. So I'm going to copy this and open it up. If we go into here, I'm pretty sure it's to do with the API not being available. So in here it says, while pre-rendering a page, next build, an error occurred. This can happen to various reasons, including incorrect file structure, expecting props to be populated which are not available during pre-rendering, using browser-only APIs and components without proper check, and incorrect configuration in get static props or get static paths. This has basically happened because we are using the APIs that are not running at the minute, so we can't really build without an API, which is fine. So I'm not worrying about that too much, but we will need to revisit what the issue is. So let me just quickly go into here, and what we need to do is we need to create a GitHub repo. And generally what will happen with Vercel is your GitHub repo will connect to whatever Vercel is. So let me just go in here, and then I'm going to create a repository. This is going to be Next.js 15 crash course, like so. This is public, so let me just create this repository, and what I'm going to do is first of all connect our work to that repo. So git init initializes it. Let me just paste this in and edit and press enter like so. So now all we need to do is do git add, git commit, and then you commit message -m of whatever we've done. So in this scenario it will be a feature created the travel app with Next.js 15, like that. Press enter, and now all you need to do is git push, and then I generally just copy this instead of typing it out and press enter. So now this will push all of our changes to the repo that we need. And now what we can do is refresh this page. We have our code that we need in here, so that's all good. Now we need to go into Vercel. Now what I want to do is add new project, import this one in, and then we can basically just deploy. So now this is all going to build everything for us, and this should work. So now that we've deployed it, what's going to happen is it's building now. So let's go into here and let's check the logs out. So basically it's building everything. So once it has built everything, we'll be right back. Right, so now everything's completed. It says here deployment completed, uploading build cache. So in here you can see all of the pre-rendered pages that we have. We have static pages of 9, everything works correctly. Then it assigns a custom domain and so on. We can now see our deployed application. So again, we have our URL in here. You can update that. So let's actually go and update this in our application. So now we've deployed it. And if we basically do base path in here, you can see essentially, let's just copy this, find that, and then replace it with our own version. So let me just go into here, copy this and replace it. So replace everywhere. Then we can also redeploy this as well if you need to, but let's just keep it as it is. Then this is our final build. So we've now done the Next.js crash course. Again, everything we have covered is available in the description. We've done all of these topics in here. So this is a good basis on working with Next.js 15. Let's look at the final app. So in here we have, this is our final app. You can change the favicon and so on, but again, let's go. If we inspect, let's go into console. We've got an error. What's the error? Now we have the cause error, which again is because we're using cross-origin resource, because we're using an external API. So what we want to do is use our own now, which is what we have. So again, we can just say changed base endpoint in here, and then all we can do now is redeploy, make sure everything works, and it should do this time. So all you do in Vercel is just click back, and you can see here now we've changed base endpoint, so everything will be building. Again, we have a firewall active. You can also enable your analytics if you want to. So again, let's just click into here, let all of the build logs complete. And then once this has completed, then we will be able to check everything works, and we will be right back. Right, so now that's built, let's go ahead and test everything works. So let's just inspect, make sure there's no errors in the console. So let's click let's go, and there are errors. So it's saying here, this endpoint has been blocked. So again, now that we've deployed, what will happen in the local environment, sometimes it works fine, everything works correctly. So when we deploy to production, something else occurs. So this is what happens in a normal circumstance. So what we need to do is fix this error. It's a simple fix. What we need to do is go into next.config. So in here, all we need to do is paste this part in, which is essentially, we've got our URL in here of the value of allow origin, and we want this to be true for allow credentials. We're allowing the methods of get, post, and options, and again allow headers in here. So that's everything. And then again, we want to match all API paths in here. So now what we just want to do is allow only the front end of our application. So in here now, all we need to do is add in the commit message saying added in the headers into next config, like so. And then all you need to do is commit and push. And now this will basically save all and commit changes. So now this will fix everything for us in terms of the cause issues that we are having. So let's just go into here in our Vercel. If you press back, you can see this one's building. So let's see what's happening with this one. And once it has built, we will be right back. Right, so now that's built, let's go ahead and test this one out. So let me just close down all of the other tabs that we have. So in here now, let's click and check what is going on. So let's click let's go, inspect console, and you can see runtime error, and then this one's been blocked. So it's saying here that we have a double slash going on in here. So let's just actually find that in the code and try and fix that. So let's just search for this URL here and replace everything that we have. So this value is fine. This one has a slash in it, so we need to remove that. It's just basically adding the extra slashes in for no reason, because we also have the slash API there. So again, we could create the global value for this so it doesn't do this. And now let's save, and we need to redeploy again. So let's go ahead and do that. Updated endpoints. And I believe this should fix everything now. So commit and push this. And I believe that might be the error as well. So it's quite easy to make stupid mistakes like that. So you just need to make sure and be careful when it comes to doing all of this work. So now let's go into Vercel, press back. There's a deployment happening, or if not, it's already happened. It's here now, it's building. So this one should fix everything for us. So let's click into it. And once it is complete, which should be anytime now, we can check this out. Right, so now that's complete. You can see here we have multiple URLs. So let's actually test one of them, and you can see what will happen. So if I inspect this one in the console, if I scroll up, you can see here it says that the cause policy doesn't allow this. So it says here header has a value of this URL over here. So if we go into here, we've only identified this one as the main domain. So what you could do is add these two as well. So for example, let's click on the one we've added as the whitelist. So in here, let's go. And now you can see all of our destinations are showing in here. If we click on view details, you can see our attractions are showing as well. And finally, if you go on reviews, you can see our reviews in here as well. Let me just do a new review in here. So Barcelona, Imran, this was amazing. And then let's give this a rating of 5 and submit. Review submitted successfully, and you can see it's updated in my API over here as well. So that is the Next.js 15 crash course. To recap, what we've covered is we've set up the Next.js project. We've created a dynamic API with all of our endpoints that we've created. We've fetched data in the server component and client components as well. The dynamic routing for a single ID using the params. We've also looked at not found for invalid pages and also created the 404 pages. We've done Tailwind and created a reusable header. We've used our environment variables, and then we've deployed our app to Vercel along with creating our own APIs, like I mentioned before. We've also added in our middleware for processing. And finally, we've optimized the performance with React Server Actions. So that is essentially everything we've covered in this build. And we've also deployed it to Vercel. So anytime we make any changes going forward, everything will just update using Vercel itself. So hopefully everything made sense. And I hope you learned a lot in this video. Please like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.